Good morning. So my question for you today is this. Do you really, genuinely have a deep desire to achieve something great, something significant with your life? Do you want your life to count for something great, something lasting? Do you want to leave a legacy? Well, my message to you today is that significance, genuine, lasting significance, is a gift from God. He is the one who makes one great and casts another down. Strength and power and wisdom and ability come from God. And not only that, but I think the point I want to communicate with today's devotion is that wisdom for life comes from God. Now, we're going to see today the life of a man, Nehemiah, who achieved greatness with his life. This guy achieved an enormous amount. He was instrumental in the rebuilding of the city that would welcome, and not welcome, in fact crucify in the end, the Messiah. The whole plan of salvation, the salvation of God's people for all time, was dependent on the nation of Israel still being around and having been rebuilt, and the city of Jerusalem being there, and the priesthood functioning at the temple, and all of the stuff that was going on at the time of Jesus, so that the Messiah could come, and that the events of his life could unfold, and that he could then be crucified at the hands of the Jews and Romans, and rise from the dead, and offer life and salvation to all the earth. None of that could have happened if Jerusalem had not been rebuilt and reestablished. So this man Nehemiah played a fruitful and important role in the unfolding of history itself. So now what I want to do today is I want to apply some of the principles that we learn from Nehemiah's life to our lives. If I, as a man, you, as a man or a woman, want to achieve something significant with your life, I think there are things to learn from this man's life. And I'm going to mention 4 of them today. Now, as an aside, before we get into that, I want to remind you, I am assuming that you have read the verses which I go through each day in these daily devotions. So this series of devotions is not what has technically been called in theological circles an Old Testament introduction, or when we get into the New Testament, a New Testament introduction. What an Old and New Testament introduction do, and normally an Old Testament introduction is a book this thick and a New Testament introduction is a book that thick. What they do is they go through each of the 66 books of the Bible, and there will be one chapter devoted to each book. And then in that chapter they will tell you who was the author, what date do they think it was written, where was it written, who was the original audience it was written to, what are the major themes of the book, what are the theological lines that would run through the book, what are some of the challenges that have been laid against this book. So that's what an introduction do. Now, I don't do that in these daily devotions. I don't go into the detail of what was the setting at the time, who wrote this, who was it written to, and what are the major themes we find through the whole book. I don't do that. What we do is we read 3 chapters a day, give or take, and I will pick out something that stands out for me, and I will do a little devotion on it. That is very different to an Old Testament and New Testament introduction. One of the ramifications of that is you are going to have read the verses or the chapters that I am commenting on each day. So please keep up with the reading. If you want a good New Testament or Old Testament introduction series, you're wanting more kind of in-depth knowledge around each book, can I recommend to you, now there are many good books and videos out there, but can I recommend to you David Pawson's series of books, and then it's also available as a series of videos, which I love, called Unlocking the Bible. So just Google Unlocking the Bible, David Pawson, Pawson. And I think, in fact, you can get all of it on his website. He's passed away now recently, but it's davidpawson.org. Otherwise, they're all available on YouTube. And he will then go through, say, Esther, which is the next book we're going to get to, and I actually just watched that one yesterday, like a 40-minute video on the whole book of Esther, just introducing the book to you, and they are wonderful. So if you're looking for that kind of detail, I point you to David Pawson's Unlocking the Bible. Right, today, how to live a life of significance, a life of greatness. Okay, so 4 principles from the life of Nehemiah, this great man. And the first verse I'm going to read to you is from chapter 2, verse 12. This is when Nehemiah has already arrived in Jerusalem, and he now, probably the first night he was there, he got up without anybody knowing he was going. He took a couple of his servants with him, and he went and inspected the walls to see for himself what the truth of it was, because he'd heard the report of it, of how bad things were when he was back home, serving the king as his cupbearer. Now he wanted to see for himself. And I want to read those verses to you, or this verse, chapter 2, verse 12. Then I arose in the night, I and a few men with me. I told no one what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem. Okay, now, why do I want to comment on that? Because this is the first of the 4 principles of living a life of greatness that I want to communicate with you from the life of Nehemiah. You want to do something great. Make sure it's not your own idea, but God's. God is the one with all wisdom. God is the one who made you. He has created you to walk in certain good works that He has prepared beforehand that you should walk in them. God has a plan for your life. Now, I believe many, many people never walk in the fullness of the plan that God has for them, either through laziness, or through lack of prayer, or through lack of seeking God, or through lack of submission, or through a love of sin and a selfish desire to go their own way, or a lack of faith in God. There are many reasons why people miss the plan of God for them. So here's number 1. Make sure that whatever it is you are giving yourself to has been put in your heart by God Himself. Now, how do you know that? This is a tricky question to answer. All I can tell you is if you seek God and you prayerfully lay this matter before Him, I believe the Holy Spirit will stir your heart at certain moments in life where you will know, man, there's a passion, there's a fire burning inside me for this thing, and I can't extinguish it. It's like God is doing, and the more I pray about it, the more I lay it before God, the stronger this fire burns. And we can go back in Nehemiah's life, and we actually see the very moment that God put it in his heart to do this. And I'm going to read that to you. This was when Nehemiah was serving the king in Shushan, the citadel, and he was the cupbearer, so he would taste the wine to make sure there was no poison in it, and then he would give it to the king. And the king liked Nehemiah. He enjoyed his company. He was always a jovial character. And now a group of Jews from Jerusalem passed through town, and they met with Nehemiah, and they gave him some bad news. He asked, how are things in Jerusalem? How are things back home? He still saw that as his home, although he never lived there himself. That was his home, Jerusalem. And he asked, and then they said to him, no, the walls are burnt and broken down. The place is in a terrible state. And then we read in verse 4 of chapter 1, so it was when I heard these words. Now this is where God puts it in his heart, this moment. This moment changed Nehemiah's life. That I sat down and wept. And I mourned for many days. I was fasting and praying before the God of heaven. When that moment comes where you are seeking God and you're regularly in His presence, where something grips you with an extraordinary power, and it's not a selfish thing, it's not gripping you because it's going to make you rich, or you've got to check your motives in that moment. But when something grips you and you almost feel the Spirit tugging on your heart, that you can, with all the certainty that we can in this life, say, man, God has put this thing in my heart. So I wish I could give you more certainty around how that moment happens in life, but when it happens, you'll know it. And this is the first piece of advice that we learn from Nehemiah. What you give yourself to, make sure it is that thing that God has put in your heart. So, once God has put something in your heart, then what happens? This is now point number 2 on living a life of significance. Is it then just plain sailing and all wondrous fruitfulness from that point onwards? No, once God has put something in your heart, let me tell you this, get ready for a fight and for difficulty and hardship, and get ready that it's going to take longer than you ever expected, and it's going to be harder than you ever expected. That's what you can get ready for. And so, in order to prepare for the journey ahead, we see Nehemiah do the following. So it was, when I heard these words, I sat down and wept. And then what does he do? And I mourned for many days. I was fasting and praying before the God of heaven. He fasted. He prayed. When you feel like God has put something in your heart, my friend, you better immediately start seeking God for it. Fast about it. Pray about it. Seek God about it. Asking Him His advice. Pour out your feelings and your thoughts about it. Pour out your plans before Him. Beg Him to show you the way. Beg Him to take it away from you if it's actually a worldly or a carnal desire and it's not from Him. Ask Him to confirm it for you. You need to seek God for this thing. Ask Him that if it is of Him, that He would continue to open the doors for you as you tentatively move forward and you continually pray about this thing. You need to seek God for it. Don't just assume because you're excited about something that it's of God. Seek Him, fast about it, pray about it. Listen to Nehemiah's prayer. He said, I pray, Lord God of heaven, O great and awesome God, you who keep your covenant and mercy with those who love you and observe your commandments, please let your ear be attentive and your eyes be open, that you may hear the prayer of your servant, which I pray before you now day and night for the children of Israel, your servants, and confess the sins of the children of Israel, which we have sinned against you. Both my father's house and I have sinned. We have acted very corruptly against you and have not kept the commandments, the statutes, nor the ordinances which you commanded your servant Moses. Remember, I pray, the word that you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though some of you were cast out to the farthest part of the heavens, yet I will gather them from there and bring them to the place which I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. Now, these are your servants and your people, whom you have redeemed by your great power and by your strong hand. O Lord, I pray, please let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who desire to fear your name, and let your servant prosper this day. I pray, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man, for I was the king's cupbearer. So Nehemiah he's gripped by this thing and he cries out to God and says, Lord, I am now going to ask the king for leave to go back to Jerusalem. And God, I'm asking you, I'm begging you, have mercy. Let your ears be open, Lord, please. Just because God has given you a vision and a dream for your life, it doesn't mean that you don't have to pray for Him to bring it about. You do. So, number 2, you've got to seek God. Then number 3, we read in chapter 2, verses 2 to 5. So Nehemiah is now about to ask the king for his permission to leave. He's busy serving wine. Now, he'd always been a pretty jovial character and he'd always been in good spirits as he served the king. But this time he was sad, and the king noticed it and said to him, why is your face sad? Since you are not sick, this is nothing but sorrow of heart. So I became dreadfully afraid. I mean, Nehemiah knew what he was about to do. It could have his head taken off and he could just be denied. His whole dream hung in the balance in what was about to happen. And he is gripped with fear and dread in this moment. And he said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's tombs, lies waste and its gates are burned with fire? And then the king said to me, what do you request? So I prayed to the God of heaven. And I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, I ask that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it. Okay, so what do we learn here? God put something in your heart. you then seek him and pray and fast about it, and you seek him. And there will come a moment where it is now time to act. And when that moment comes, first of all, shoot up what is sometimes called a shotgun prayer. I mean, this was like the quickest prayer ever prayed. What do you want, Nehemiah? So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said to the king. So he just said, Lord, help me. And then he spoke to the king. In that moment, shoot up a shotgun prayer, but then seek what you want. Seek it, go after it, ask for it, and trust God to be with you. Too many people don't get anywhere in life because they are afraid to take risks. If you believe God has put something in your heart, and you have honestly sought him and prayed about it and fasted about it, and that the moment comes where you can now step into it, but you're terrified, shoot up a shotgun prayer, but then have some courage and go for it. That's my third principle for a life of greatness. And then fourthly, work hard. Work hard. I mean, the story from verse 13 of chapter 2, where Nehemiah's gone back to Jerusalem, he now inspects the walls, and from the next moment after that, he then starts gathering people, and they go through this incredible journey of rebuilding the wall with unbelievable opposition. And tomorrow we're going to look at 6 enemies that he faced as he sought to do the will of God and fulfill God's purpose for his life. I mean, the journey was incredibly difficult, and they worked unbelievably hard. This is not a matter of, oh, it's going to be easy because God's put it in my heart. No, you will toil, and some of you will burn out doing what God has put it in your heart to do. And some of you will only get the rest that you want when you get to heaven, but you will leave a legacy. It's not easy living a life of fruitfulness. It's not going to be plain sailing. You can expect opposition and exhaustion, but you have to be willing to work hard. I tell you, laziness. I look at the current generation and the access to social media and video and gaming. Those 3 things, social media, video, and gaming. That is teaching an entire generation of young people today to be idle, to be fed, to sit back and just enjoy the dopamine rush that all of those things give you, instead of committing yourself to something incredibly difficult and being willing to persevere in it and work hard at it. That is my fear with the current generation of young people, is that we're raising a generation that don't know what hard work is, who don't know what perseverance and hardship is all about. And let me tell you, my friend, you want to achieve greatness in life, it's going to require hard work. So those are my principles from the life of Nehemiah. Number 1, make sure God has put it in your heart. Then seek the Lord. Pray about this often. Pour your heart out to God and lay your plans before him, asking him for wisdom. Then thirdly, when your moment comes, shoot up a shotgun prayer and show some courage and go for it. And then fourthly, be willing to work incredibly hard. And may the God of Nehemiah give you success. See you tomorrow.